So I met Darrell because we had a lady called Carolina come and stay. My wife runs an artist retreat, and she worked at Meta, and she works in game design, but she was a concept artist. So I thought this is a really sort of not very well known area of the industry. It's totally based on craft and artistry, which you'll see from Darrell when he talks it through with us what his job is. And it's often really incredible artistry, if you don't mind me saying so.
Thank you.
And so I thought it was just an opportunity to kind of explore some of the different career paths and some of the sort of issues that are facing the industry. And so we wanted to get Darrell in to talk about his work and what he does. And I think the format is going to be Darrell's going to have a little talk about his work and his career. And then Sarah, who does a lot of work around costume, we're very lucky to have her in the department, we'll have a little chat with Darrell. And then we'll have Q&A at the end. So we will possibly be touching on AI, but let's just hold that back till the end. I know that everyone's keen to get sort of that, but we don't want it to dominate the conversation because there's a lot more to what Darrell does than just having to undermine AI constantly. So I'll leave it to you. Are you happy to present?
Yep, absolutely.
And I think we should all have a little round of applause for Darrell and also for you lot for your patience. So thank you very much.
I was just had to take off one of my layers.
Yeah.
So I'll quickly start really with a really brief sort of introduction of my background. So I started, I've been in the business, not in the business of film, but I've been in the business of film for 25, 26 years. Prior to that, I was in sort of advertising illustration. So my background was I was a portrait artist. I trained as a portrait artist. That in turn got me into film much later. But initially, I'm just going to quickly run you through that early sort of 16 years of illustration. I'm going to be really brief, but you'll see by doing so where I started. So this is a student piece. So I trained in oils initially, but then transferred into watercolour. This is my first watercolour at the age of 18. I'm just going to run you through. So these are more student pieces. I'm really at this stage very much experimenting with techniques and looks and style. So you'll see it's quite differing, but all based around sort of figurative stuff. This is a little bit later, so now I've gone into the commercial world. This one on the actual, the left to you, in fact, is one of the very first video games back in 1986 for a British company called Microprose. And they were very big in that gaming world to begin with, and then because they had the name Microprose, they were approached by Microsoft, and they were sued by Microsoft because of the names were too familiar. So they actually went bust, ironically, as a fact of Microsoft. These are the sort of typical commercial jobs that I was working through at the time. And I was based in a studio in the West Country. I'm from Somerset originally, so I was very much in the provinces. I went to Falmouth Art School. I graduated and a group of us set up a studio together, an illustration and painting studio. So these are the sort of clients and sorts of jobs we did. A lot of publishing, a lot of advertising. But the one overriding thing about all of this is you'll just see lots of different styles. I have not keyed myself into being specifically costume at this point in time. This is just the way I made my living. The diversity of these two images, for instance, one is publishing, one is limited edition print. Again, greetings cards. These are just other samples, sort of sample what we used to call tear sheets on the right-hand side here. And this is how we got work. There was no internet, no mobile phones. We produced printed tear sheets to send to agencies via the post. Seems so old-fashioned now, but that's just the way it was at the time. And then we get a little bit later. So I've graduated now. Probably this is early 2000s. I've gone back to portraiture. Also, by this point, I'm also in film. So I am kind of balancing and spinning those different plates because film work we're all freelance, so if there's no job on, I then pick up, I try to generate commissions. So when I'm not working on a film, I go and do my own painting. And again, because of the area that I'm involved in, because I can do figurative work, I'm just, I'm interested in other aspects, subject matter of painting. So I get commissioned because I do somebody's horse. I then get to do their dog. And then so after 16 years of freelancing illustration, then we move into film. So I came into film in 1999, 98-99, and I worked on an HBO production that was a really fantastic introduction to the department of costume in terms of one. It was a series called, it was post Band of Brothers, and I don't know if anybody remembers that series on HBO, probably not, but it's about Alexander the Great. So it's supposedly a 10-part series about the history and about that empire. So very historical. What happened for me was I was exposed to so many different artisans, so many different contractors within the industry, from researchers who you have to employ to, give you the information in the first instance. Cutters, leather workers, jewelers, designers, assistant designers, PAs. That's just in the costume department. I think we totaled with tailors and cutters and seamstresses. I think we were probably about 40 at that point in time as a department. But also within the same building at Pinewood, we had the art department. So I could come and go between both departments and really just, kind of expose myself to what everybody's role was. So it was a really lovely insider sort of, kind of great information for me. However, the job didn't go anywhere. I worked on it for 18 weeks, and it just didn't remain, it wasn't green lit. So, and you think, oh, okay, is this how film's going to be? And then a few months passed by, and I should explain that I got into costume because of somebody I knew in the first instance, who knew my facility to draw. So there's a costume designer called Penny Rose. I've known Penny, she was a family friend. I'd used her children as models for various children's book covers. So she knew what I could offer, and I think she had a notion that I'd be quite useful in a costume department as a concept artist. So she contacted me and said, about this first job about Alexander the Great, and I think there was a realization on her part that, okay, this is a really fascinating way to present visuals to the producers and the director to the studio. So once that first job just disappeared, I think it was probably another 4 or 5 months, and she phoned me up on a Thursday evening, and she asked me if I was busy, and I said, yes, so. And she said, can you be at Pinewood at Monday morning, 8 o'clock? And that next job was Pirates of the Caribbean. So that's a kind of serendipitous kind of moment, and I don't know, I think at that particular point in time, Disney really weren't behind the project. So I'm just going to highlight, obviously the success that became was unbeknownst to us at the time. So, I remember I worked on it first, I did two batches of time. I think I did 6 weeks, and then Disney pulled the plug on it. Said, we're not going ahead with the project, we're not happy with the way Johnny Depp's looking. I mean, all manner of things were going on. And that was over, like on a Thursday evening, overnight onto the Friday in the UK. So we came in the next day, Penny says, okay, I'm really sorry guys, the film's off. I'm just going to I'll take you to lunch, go home. Sunday evening, she phones up, can you come in tomorrow? The producers are convinced Disney that it's going to carry on. But they didn't really, Disney weren't invested in it in a really odd way, because it was so left field for them that they very much left Gore Verbinski, the director, to just kind of go and have a play. But he'd surrounded himself with some fantastic people. One in Penny Rose, the costume designer, but Rick Heinrichs, the production designer, and various other cinematographers and whatever. So there's a really hardcore, very, very, very creative people who were quite manic, I have to say. and it was mad being in the department, but a lot of fun. I mean, from my background, historical background, certainly with art, I could then reference people like Howard Pyle, who I had perceived as being like the father of the modern image of pirate image. I don't know if anybody knows Howard Pyle or N.C. Wyeth, but if you don't, I would suggest you look them up if you're interested in both image and historical references in terms of piratical, and because I had not knowledge, we then decided what we do is to very much focus on that aspect because of the perception in the modern era of how a pirate should look. So we weren't going to reference the Errol Flynn and all the historical cinematic stuff that had been done before. Penny wanted to take a very, very particular approach. So when you look at that film, of course, it has a very, very rich patination. And that's the success of the film, ultimately, in terms of those costumes and those characters. But I'll just backtrack. So because Disney weren't invested, I remember then, I think I probably did 12 weeks in total, so 3 months. Finished, my job was done, I was out the door. They then go off and shoot. We've done all the makes. There was no marketing whatsoever. I remember driving into London, like 2 years later, and I was going for supper, and we'd been diverted around Hounslow off the M4, so it's absolutely heaving it down with rain. There's a bus stop, and there's a poster for Pirates of the Caribbean. And I sort of looked, and I said to my officer, I wasn't driving, and I said, "Oh my God, there's that film we worked on." Had no knowledge that Disney were ever going to go ahead with it. So that's just the nature of film itself. It's very unpredictable. And then, of course, it cost $130 million and grossed $900 million. So you can see the funds involved and the profit. So then they made 2 and 3 back to back. So a year later, we're back in the studio working on 2 and 3. So I'm just going to quickly run you through. These are all the titles that I've been involved in. So they're all high-end budget films. They are the only films that ever employ me because they have the funds. So I don't work on any small independent films. It's not to say that you don't get to work, that people as concept artists don't get to work on them. I'm just involved at this high level end, I guess, because I'm just perceived with the experience that I have now that I become an asset to the design team. And for me, that's really crucial. Anybody being within a costume department, the core of everything. I only ever work in pre-production, so I am always part of the design team. And once my role is done, it can be anything from a few days to a few weeks to a few months to like a year and a half, depending on the scale of the film. Then this is kind of a recent, these are the more recent films. So, and then anybody's familiar with the Magic Faraway Tree, which comes out, I think, in a couple of weeks' time. I think that will be quite good fun. So, so I'm just going to leave you to read that a second. All done? So the most important line there is the last one. You are part of a team. It's as simple as that. There's no ego involved. You're there for a job. You have to serve your purpose. You can't come with preconceived ideas as to what something is. My job is to ask questions on behalf of the designer. The core of it is to really get to the center of what the costume is and what it's asking of our character and the story it's telling, which I think is probably quite a good time before we get into the images. If I just ask those with a piece of paper, would you mind just coming to the front? So all I'm going to highlight here is inherently we all get up every morning and we're all characters. We all dress ourselves and we have a perception of how we present ourselves to the world. So what I'm saying is here, everybody's an individual, but you can tell so much about their character. So it's not about you as individuals, but you know, if I were to say one of these lads here, one of you want to turn around, would you mind? So what I'd say about this is uniform, because both characters are in the same. They've got they've got a title on. So in many respects, from a costume perspective, we're saying that's a look. So that's a kind of a vibe that we can key into, as it, with our selection of characters here. And it says so much about, what can you tell about each character? So, trainers. And when I'm in trainers, what's the difference? We're both in trainers. Mine are probably a little more of a statement because they're yellow. And what does it say about, if you look into the actual aspects of those types of trainers, for instance, you'd say that possibly, do you run? No.
These are just ripped.
Just ripped. Yeah. So again, you can see where the toe is poking through. So that, for me, that adds a little bit of character. So what I'm saying is, when you look at character and you look at dressing somebody in terms of a drawing, you can add. I tend to add that texture, simply because it adds more. Everybody, we don't all get up every morning. We're not all perfectly dressed. I wear a pair of jeans that are ripped. With all due respect, the shoes, a very given type of shoes, which are quite soft leather, for instance. So you can pick up the stretched element of that leather. I'm looking for all those little things when I'm thinking about promoting a look for a character. Flares, turn-ups, floral, and then shorts with kind of the vibe of the hair. So it's a little bit alternative. So again, we take on board all that, coloured hair, different hairstyles, the way people's postures. That's what we're selling, or that's what I'm looking to sell. So when you look at film, when you look at characters, we subliminally pick up on characters straight away. In terms of, okay, thank you, Pete. But when we look at character, I think, especially on screen, there's a little bit of research done in terms of, and it's really important for me, and I think for anybody going to the cinema or looking at film in particular, a character is etched on the psyche within 1.3 of the point second. That's really critical. So if those characters aren't sold to you within that point in time, or that fraction of time, they are quite often lost to you throughout the film. So if you think, obvious things, big features like Batman, we immediately see Batman. We understand what he is. But that is ultimately kind of our goal every time. So if I say Jack Sparrow, you can picture Jack Sparrow. But that's what I'm trying, from my perspective, working with my designer, that's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to those images subliminally, so they sell to an audience. So this is, I'll run you through very quickly because I'm very conscious of time. This is the very first project I worked on, that when I was telling you about the HBO. And obviously it's historical. So my style at this time was sort of very illustrative because it was my first project, so I was kind of trying to prove myself, I guess. And as I've just said, with those people who came out, we have to be conscious that character is costume, costume is character. I think it's a really key thing that we recognise, because one cannot separate one from the other. The first Pirates of the Caribbean. This is my very first drawing, the middle one. So this is my first concept of Barbossa. We had no casting. Geoffrey Rush hadn't been cast. And then I just worked with the designer, and we just do, we kind of break down what those characters are. Quite often we'll reference existing garments. So that sort of 18th century frock coat, we pulled a lot out of kind of costume houses, and we compile mood boards, and that's kind of the way that I'm presented stuff to work from as inspiration. And then once we have, once we knew who our actors are, because of my background as a portrait artist, I can then start to imbue a likeness. Yeah, for much of the time, you know, I'm not making this up out of my head. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. You know, as I say, it's quite often referenced. But in terms of selling the figure and the way the figure stands and so on, it's quite often I'll get somebody from the department, or as I've selected some of you today, I'll ask, you know, people within the department, you know, would you mind modelling for me? It just means that I haven't got, you know, I don't have the time to second guess physique. You know, I can't. It's superficial to what my job is. I'm not required to you know, show dynamic poses. I'm selling. My job is to sell costume. That's it. I mean, I can sell a look by a narrative, telling a story, and Penny Rose very much embraces that because it really helps her in terms of setting a group of characters. And again, the same. These are all from, I think, Pirates 2 and 3. Blackbeard from Pirates 4. 4. I lose count after a while. And again, from the last instalment, Salazar's Revenge. Now, this is an interesting aspect because our actor, who was called, what's his name? Javier Bardem. So Javier wasn't really the first choice at all for this character. The producers and Penny Rose came to me and said, can you do a drawing of him as the character that we can try and sell it to him? Trying to get him to take the role. So that's another aspect of the job which is really kind of quite odd, but then you know, I've become reasonably known for that, and very much for, you know, in Penny's team, she likes to you know, kind of say, well, I'll get Darrell to do, you know, to propose something. Sorry, yes, I got the question.
Does that also mean that Penny doesn't need to do any drawing?
Most costume designers don't do any drawing.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
and it probably not on a high budget film they wouldn't have you, but maybe they would.
Maybe they would. Yeah, no. A lot of costume designers, some costume designers do draw, but most of them don't have the time to draw.
Yeah.
You know, because of the scale of the feature. So as much as some of them do, I mean, when we get to Wicked, you know, Paul Tazwell does draw a lot, and that you know, promotes a very different relationship.
Yeah.
But most of them, I mean, they honestly can't draw.
Because I just can't draw. But
No,
I'm so interested
no,
in this.
exactly.
Don't a lot of them use mood boards?
Yeah, they're always referencing
Which
mood
is,
boards. Yeah.
so there is
Yeah.
some sort of
Yeah.
visual
Yeah.
reference.
But in terms of trying to get, I mean, you would have seen Frankenstein won a few awards this weekend, we're certainly with costume, but Kate Hawley draws. She's a rarity within the business. You know. And then I did, you know, I worked for Aardman, so I've done, you know, quite a few features with them. But this is a very different aspect again. This is probably a little bit more about storytelling, you know, and keyframes within a script. And that's the joy for me is, you know, I come to project. This is the Pirates and the Eventual Scientists. You know, I part of my job was to really design a lot of the costume and the colour palettes. So that's what but that was on the back of Pirates of the Caribbean. So I'd already had that name, so they reached out to me and said, could you come and advise us on? You know. So it's kind of inside knowledge of another, you know, genre of film. And then this is kind of, you know, this is the areas that I tend to operate in probably more now, you know, probably selling character a lot more than I used to. And that's what I've become known for. But as you'll know, I only draw and paint. I don't use, it's all traditional, I don't use any computers at all. Simply because I wanted to stand, I wanted to remain sort of true to myself because I really believed in drawing. And then I guess when Photoshop first appeared on the scene, I couldn't afford a computer. I didn't have enough money to buy a computer. So I thought, okay, I'm going to stick my neck out and let's try and stay where I am in that lane. I mean, I took a really big hit because a lot of my work disappeared. So you have to reinvent yourself somewhat.
Do you adapt your style according to the genre? Do you have to sort of do, I know you said that you're kind of eclectic in, you know, a particular brief of a film one would be very different from another,
Mm.
so that will affect the drawing you do. But is there within that, conscious sort of, this
Yes and no, but I
Yeah.
think most designers I work with know how I work.
yeah.
So
okay.
that's, and those designers, I don't do, it's worth noting, I don't really do any contemporary film because it doesn't call for character in the same way that I draw. So lots of people who work digitally do a lot of modern stuff. I've done a couple of Mission Impossibles, but I've been brought in very specifically to solve a problem because I work with all the cutters and artisans. So, and I have a technical facility because I understand how stuff is made. That's the other aspect. I always try, from my perspective, to be on site within the department, because if there's any issues, I can just draw it. As opposed to working remotely, I might lose half a day asking a question via email. They're paying me. It doesn't make sense to me. And I'd much rather be on site because I want to be informed. It's knowledge. Whatever they're making is knowledge for my drawing. That's really, really critical. So that, that's a study. This character, Carrington from the Lone Ranger. So I'm given a slight brief, and it's like, how can we make him really interesting? So, I gave him the hair lip, the scar, and the gold tooth. And I thought, actually, it'd be really lovely to, because he is the kind of the evil aspect, or, within the script, within the storyline, like a rattlesnake earring. It's kind of reasonably subtle. But then, we have to sell that look. So I was just commissioned. Penny said, "Can you just do a fully rendered watercolor?" The way it works, and you'll probably find this when you get into film, that you become part of teams. As I said before, I became very much a part of Penny's design team, and then invariably those personalities within that group, they may get different jobs. So Penny had a really sort of tight group for many, many years. For the first 8 years, I think, within film, I worked with Penny, and nowhere else. I only ever worked for her. But then two things happened. I think it was 2010. The supervisor, costume supervisor, who takes care of all the logistics and the kind of the buying aspect of the film for the costume department, and Penny went their separate ways. So Penny went to America and worked. I don't have a green card, so I didn't go. But the costume supervisor, went and started working for Marvel. So then I traversed into the Marvel universe. So the first thing I did was I worked on Captain America, and then the second job was I did Thor, and I did Guardians of the Galaxy. So that opens up a completely different genre of film, and it just meant that I was exposed to a very different way of working with a lot of very modern designers, shall we say, who had it, because we're now, as opposed to working historically, we're now creating worlds. So that becomes a very different part of the job. We're creating costume, the production designer creating, all those environments, and we have to populate them. So I just feature that because there's obviously a piece of quill, or Star-Lord, and then I think you've probably had a talk from Dominic Young.
I don't think the students have. I think I.
Oh, you have. Okay.
Yeah, he's a cutter.
Yeah. So Dom was part of this team. Another lad called Andrew Cartwright, and so they're all assigned characters, and then they have teams of seamstresses. And it can be. I think on Guardians of the Galaxy we might have been 180 strong in the costume department alone. So they become big, kind of juggernaut. Productions. But this is just to show some of the issues we were having, because and part of my job was to solve some of those issues. We had an actor with fairly large thighs. So what happens when we put a gun holster? So you have a real one, which is weighted, and then we had another prop, which is light. But they need to sit and locate on the thigh. So my job was really to start designing a holster and to work with props to make sure that we could you know, we were using all manner of technology like magnets and Velcro and whatever, just to make sure that what we didn't want was that, you know, for the weight to flop the guns out, so they had to very much stick to the hip. So that's just one small technical issue, you know, within the larger issue of putting together a look for a character. Yeah, and these are just concept, you know, straightforward, just drawings, just to trying to get flavours. I mean, there were lots of kids in the original script, and then they, you know, eventually just dropped. They were on the planet of nowhere, but you still have to go through you know, all those processes of presenting those ideas. So what I'm doing here is I'm constantly asking the question: is this what you want? That's my job. My job is to ask the question of the designer: is this what you're looking for? Is this what, you know, the director requires? So, yeah, so the costume vernacular. So we talk a lot about, within costume, we talk about the vernacular of a look. So when I presented the group of people in the front here, you're all individuals. And what we've focused on before is, you know, to do with individual, but then you get to, you know, like the uniform or a vernacular look of a movement of people within a film. So on Doctor Strange, for instance, we had you know, there's a whole, I don't know if you're familiar with the film, but Strange ends up at the Camouflage, which is in Nepal. So we started to embrace a sort of Eastern, sort of philosophic kind of look, slightly based on Kung Fu, but it had to have its own language, and that language had to be reflected through so many of the garments. But initially, you know, you start with Tilda Swinton, who was the Ancient One. We had to she was being the Ancient One. Do we mummify her? So again, you know, you ask all those questions, you ask it through drawings, and therefore, how does that mummification, you know, how does that realize itself on the body? And does that translate into the look, you know, of that group of people? So you can see with the middle image, you know, we're starting to get you can see the language, and then that's just a larger drawing trying to get, because we had various grades of character or standings within, you know, that community. We had novices, kind of intermediates and masters, and these are a group of masters. So once you become a master, we felt you could become a little bit more individualistic. So you could sell your culture, your background a little bit more. But they all had, every character had to have a sense of the history of where they've come from. And again here, you can see you know, that language being a little bit more elaborated on. So that's from the first Doctor Strange. This is from the second Doctor Strange. So we're using the same language, but at the point where we meet those characters in the film, it's now winter. So we decided it's a different designer for a start. So I've been brought on to address the camouflage look. So I felt that it would be, you know, they'd have the same language and the same shapes, but we'd start to introduce quilted and, you know, something a little bit that gives you a little bit more warmth.
So do you contribute to the colour design?
I do and I don't. Most of my stuff is, the majority of my stuff is probably, you know, 75 to 80% is drawing, for the best part.
Because there's colour images.
Yeah,
that look really nice.
I mean, there are colour images
Yeah,
coming.
yeah.
So yeah, so I, you know, in this instance, like, you know, I do, but but all these are start as drawings and then become colour, you know, visuals afterwards.
Because there would presumably have to be changes according to
exactly. So by the way that I draw first to try and preempt any issues later down the line, because we're trying to get to the very, very core of what the costume says about the character, and, you know, and how it's going to function as well. There's interesting things about when you you know, presented with your actors in terms of, you can all very well draw something on a piece of paper, kind of based on almost like you know, we're always looking for the perfect figure to dress, but when you actually get the figure and you get the measurements, you know, you'll have an actress with a high hip. Or you'll have, so, you know, Keira Knightley, for instance, in Pirates of the Caribbean was very truncated. So you use costume and the proportions of the costume to make them into the perfect figure, if that makes sense. I know it sounds, you know, and the same with the men. I mean, on Captain America, Chris Evans he wasn't the muscle man that you see. That was a muscle suit underneath. So we bring in specialist makers that make muscle suits. So we have a 3D scan of his figure, and then we bring in sculptors. They sculpt muscle mass onto that 3D figure. Then we make latex molds. Then we make a muscle suit from those latex molds, and then he puts that on. Now, at this point in time, from the costume perspective, and when they're acting, that gets very hot. So you have to put a cooling system in. So there are all these other technical issues within the realms of costume that, you know, most people think, oh, it's just a costume. It's not. There's lots of other aspects going on. So you tend to have easy access at the back, so you can put a fan. So when they immediately come off set, they can be cooled down. A lot of them wear cool suits underneath. So you have to factor all that in because it adds bulk. So you have to be, you know, but that tends to be on very much more the superhero side. Or if you're thinking about, you know, I guess Odyssey, you know, Nolan's Odyssey that comes out next year. A lot of those costumes will have cool suits underneath of some sort because of the way it was shot and because of the fact that they are, you know, oversized costumes. You know, same again. And this is interesting. So this is within the second Doctor Strange. So it was scripted that Daniel Craig was going to take the role of one of Thor's brothers, who's called Brave or Balder the Brave. So you have to concept it. As it happens within the script, he gets killed. So Daniel Craig said, "No, I don't want to do I'm not taking the role." I mean, and the character is completely dropped anyway. But we still have to. This is completely fabricated. This is made. This is a concept was completely made. So you know, the amount of money imbued and, you know, kind of pursued within a department is kind of quite extraordinary. Again, this is about vernacular. This is from the what's this? This is from the second Avengers film. So there was a dream sequence, Thor's dream sequence on Asgard. So again, you can see, you know, I'm just trying to follow a design aesthetic. Sorry. So it just follows through. And then this is from Black Widow, where we have the Red Guardian. And again, I don't really reference other films. I avoid it for the best part, but I felt that within the script this warranted a little play on the Incredibles, where Mr. Incredible, you know, is called upon. He can't get into his superhero outfit, but I felt it would be quite a nice way of selling, because it's the same with the Red Guardian with David Harbour in Black Widow. And because I have access to the actor, you know, he came in from 13 one day, and I just said to him, "I had this idea, would you mind?" He said, "No, not at all." So he actually posed, he did all these poses for me. He, not in the costume, he was just had a pair of shorts and a t-shirt on, and then I can dress it afterwards. But it's a great way to sell an idea.
How quickly, like when you're drawing from life, how quickly do you have to do these poses? Like how long did he stand for you?
So I taking photographs.
Okay.
Yeah, because, you know,
Yeah,
they're in and out. It's like, oh God, really? Do I have to do that? But he was very game, you know. And some actors are, you know, don't mind in the least. Others are like, well, yeah, okay, and they do it out of, you know, under duress. But David Harbour was pretty game for it. He thought it was a really funny idea. So, but no, I constantly have a camera with me.
Yeah, because I was going to say that was crazy. It was
Yeah.
so quick.
No, I just have a camera, and I just explain. I'm just doing directing exactly what I'm requiring, and then, you know, get them to act it out. You know, and most of them are kind of very game. You know, they get it. Yeah, sorry.
So you're not present on the shoots during the
I'm
shoots?
done by
No,
the time of shoot.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, there's a little bit of overlapping depending on the scale of film,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
But generally speaking, I only ever work in pre-production.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, and then I'm gone.
Mm.
And again, this is from Morbius. I tend not to do that many just flat-on drawings, but I think there are times when they need to be diagrammatic to show where you're coming from and what your thoughts are in terms of explaining to the designer why you're doing what you're doing. So essentially, Morbius, a living vampire, we had within the script, we had to administer plasma within his physique. So it's a case of working out the zones where you could administer that plasma, and therefore, because he is kind of just falling apart physically, because he's dying, do we put him in a girdle, or do we harness him somehow? And that's really where a lot of this language starts to come from. And it's kind of, you go from, that's my first drawing on the far left. This is really, the one in the middle is really to show the zones of administration of that plasma. And the third one is then getting, it's the case of how old school you want to be or how modern. And the designer wanted to retain a little bit of old school, so this has a lot of sort of, Soviet space technology in it, in a way. But you can see various tubes and kind of heating elements, and it was just trying to, again, it's asking the question of the director, what are you, which direction do you want this to go in? Yeah, and then I say I don't do contemporary. I mean, Spider-Man's an unusual one, but it's only because I was already in that universe. I was already working for Marvel, so then I did, hundreds of sort of contemporary color pieces for one design, and I get used by certain designers in certain ways. So some are more technical, some are more conceptual, some just want color. Some I just come in and literally just spend 3 days sorting out one character, and I'm gone again. So. You have to be. I have to be slightly fleet of foot at times. I'm very. Your mind has to work really, really quickly to conjure up solutions. Again, sort of what's this? 40s through to His Dark Materials, through to Captain America. So the wonderful thing for me is the variety of both costume and project. When I say, I don't really get involved with contemporary film because I've never pushed it, because contemporary dress doesn't really interest me that much. I'm not that interested in fashion, although it's part of my agenda. I don't look at fashion as much as perhaps I should. That said, I will isolate people like Iris Van Herpen because of their very much pushing the boundaries of what high fashion can be.
So that working with the team is fundamentally important,
Yeah.
particularly in all of the cases.
Yeah,
It seems.
and that's
really
why I
fascinating.
like to be on
Yeah.
site.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of quite often if there's an issue or a problem, then I can, if it's called for, I can address it. Yeah, so again, you can see just the variety. Kenneth Branagh as Poirot, Willy Wonka. This is what's this? Is it Hamlet? I can't remember anyway. Is it Hamlet? Yeah, it's from about 2015, I think. But again, embracing different styles, trying to sell different looks, just to make it interesting from my perspective, really.
What happens to such beautiful designs? Do you actually own them?
How
do you deal with that?
So it's a complete sellout. So I'm bought. I'm completely soulless. Everything I do is bought. I am there to provide a service.
You can imagine people wanting posters of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I do have a lot of my artwork, and you could argue that now, especially, and this is an argument on my part, is that because it's all digitalized, it's all scanned. Goes onto a company, the Disney server. They don't need the originals. So, because I'm an anomaly now. I mean, when I first started, quite a few people did draw or paint. I probably only know it's only probably two of us in the entire industry who continue to, produce work in this fashion. So, I could argue that, okay, well, you have the asset, which is the digital file, the artwork. I mean, historically, the artwork supposedly always remains yours, but I mean, it's such a grey area in film, because you sign your life away. Like that.
Do you think because you use like physical materials?
Hang on, can we just read that? Do you know? Leo, you're right to spin round. Just give us a second. Yeah. Where are you? Sorry, we want to make sure we can use your questions. Okay, go for it.
Do you think that because you use physical materials rather than like doing iPad drawings, or like it makes you like more appealing to someone who wants to hire you, or like? And sorry, another question too. If you were going to go into into the industry now, doing what you're doing, would you recommend using kind of like more online tools, iPads, kind of for the drawings and painting, or physical materials?
So for the both cases, I would say absolutely do everything digital. As I said, I'm an anomaly. I have only achieved what I've achieved simply because of the journey that I've been on. I would not recommend you pursuing a traditional approach unless you are exceptionally good at it. And I think you have to be really bloody minded. I mean, I was really stubborn, I have to say. I did not want to give up drawing. And as much as your path takes a bit of a weave, even in 2010 when I came onto those Marvel projects, for instance, I felt an immense pressure to go digital because you had guys, they had visual development guys at Marvel producing these just outstanding images, like just knock your socks off, amazing, and that's pressure because I have to kind of compete with it, and then I did buy an iPad and I did start doing stuff with Procreate, messing about, which I really enjoyed. I really loved it, but for me it was just soulless. So, and then somebody actually said to me, "Oh, why are you bothering?" And I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "Your work is so well recognised. Why would you even think about it?" And it was like, "Yeah, of course." So then you that's a bit of a kick up the backside. You think, "Yeah, of course, I should really I should just stick with what I'm known for." So I don't, the advantage that digital has over me as a practitioner is it's much faster. And then when we touch on AI, when that comes up in a second, I'll tell you about that as well. But it just means, I think, it's so much of it is the people you work for who really get what you bring to a project. And also then, the studio do recognise quality, so they very much embrace it. And so, and you can see in a way, the broadband, if you like, of my career has been, Disney, Marvel, and now I've gone, kind of gone elsewhere. And that's partially through choice, because I got fed up with doing superhero films. But I just wanted another challenge. So these are all Disney, for instance. This is Nutcracker. So that just to give you an example, so that's this is Mother Ginger. I don't know if anybody familiar with the film, but that's my concept drawing, on the left, and that's the final costume in the middle. So you can see where we start, where we end. So mine was a little bit darker, shall we say, than how it ended up. Because because it's the whole world of Disney, it's fairy tale. I felt it would be really fantastic if she was kind of this mourning figure, hence the veil. But also within, the skirt, the picture frames, which I felt, because it's fantasy, they could be animated, and they could be, animated images of, family members. So although, they're all the discussions you're having with your designer. But it, ended up being this one in the middle. You tend to find you're pushing the boundaries of what, the questions you're asking, because it's fantasy, but they tend to be, depending on your design, it ends up being reasonably conservative. Yeah, so here, this is the Elton John. So I think this is the first concept I did on that job. And I think I was only on it for a number of weeks. You just had I came in, you had to hit the ground running, churn the images out, and I'm gone again. I think I was only on it for about 5 weeks. Just did a whole host of images. In this instance, the designer wanted all colour images.
And did you look at contemporary photographs of his costumes, because he was so famous for...
Yes and no, the designer felt that there would be no point, this is the difference between the Beatles, and there'd be no point in replicating something he'd already worn.
Oh, right, okay.
So it was a reimagining...
Authenticity, not...
Yeah, so it's a reimagining what he might have, what he might also wear, so based on the script.
Yeah.
Maleficent. So again, this is, very, very briefly, I was on another project. They kept pestering me to join them, and I just couldn't. And then eventually, I said, "Yeah, okay, I'm free." But they were, 12 weeks out from shoot. All the attention has gone on Angelina Jolie as the key character. Nobody had addressed any of the other characters, so I was brought in just to go through. You just work through the script, and then you present. And I didn't do a single colour piece on this project. I just did drawings, just to show, for instance, like the one in the centre with the pattern. We had a sample of that bit of embroidery. So then, based on that, I could then, propose maybe it could be like this. So more from Maleficent. This is scripted, so we had a king and queen of the Pixies. I mean, they were dropped from the script, but we still made these costumes from my concepts, and they were extraordinary. So we've got, this is where we're embracing technology. So Miranda Richardson, played the Queen, but you can see that very, very nipped waist. But if you imagine her normal figure, and what we did is we blue screened her. So she had a blue costume on underneath with this, with the kind of the very insect-like bodice made, and then obviously in After Effects they just remove the rest of the body. So you'll think, that again, that's the way we work within costume as well. You have to be aware.
So you work with makers to have a conversation about, is this possible, or if they might say we're thinking of using this approach.
Yep.
And you would then say,
no, it's the other way around.
Okay.
I propose it, and they say,
Yeah,
"Oh my
yeah.
God, what have you done?" Sort of thing. So and then you have, you have. Assistant costume designers coming to you say, don't do those drawings, don't do those drawings because we can't make them.
Yeah.
But I know you can. It just means it's more problematical for the makers. So, but again, it's about asking the question.
Yeah.
And this is from the second Maleficent, and just again, it's just to do with characters, just trying to sell a look. I mean, I was approached. And I only ever focused on this one aspect in terms of, I said, I was already working on another job because the assistant designer was the same guy from the first film. He kept badgering me and saying, "Can you come and join us? Can you come and join us?" Because he knew that I could solve some of the issues for them. And I just couldn't. Eventually I said, "Look, I can probably give you 2 or 3 days, that's it." So I went for a meeting and I met the designer. Now, some designers are so egotistical, it's unbelievable. I can't say too much. However, let's say that the designer talked at me and not to me, and then I just came away thinking, "Oh my God, right, okay, how do I broach this?" So we're talking about the Fae, the Arctic Fae. I spoke to Hair and Makeup, who I knew, and I said, "Look, what have you done so far?" They gave me a load of photographs of what they'd been working on. I spoke to our own costume people who are in costume props, and I did 3 separate drawings. I said, "I think this is what you want," which is this drawing. "This is potentially what you could get in the time, and this is what you will get in the time," because they were 2 weeks out from shooting on the characters. So you have to work within the realms that kind of are given, but try and say, "You don't have time for this. I know this is what you want, but you could possibly do it in After Effects." So. Yeah, and yeah, you know, anamorphic thing I think is from Burton's Alice, one of the Alice films. I can't remember which one. And then this is Dr. Dolittle. So on some, Dr. Dolittle. This is the second Aquaman. So I'm given free rein by a lot of designers just to do stuff that I think will sell the character, and I'm just left to get on with it. And that's, I guess, the joy of having being in the industry for so long, for a start, and then having the trust of your designer. That's the really big thing, is the trust. Because I've worked with so many of them now for so long that they know what I bring, and they'll just say to me, "Oh, actually, that scene? No. Here's the sample of the costume. Just go away and have a play." And that's, so you come up this, this is scripted. This image in the centre was it was in the script as den of felines. So what does that mean, den of felines? There's no explanation, but that's what it said in the script. So I felt that it would be really fascinating to use big cats as opposed to just normal cats. So it's a whole gamut, of them all sort of stirring from a deep sleep. And anybody who's familiar with Dr. Dolittle, Pollyanna, the parrot. So Polly's in that image look, and you see behind the line he's just lifting up his head. So you put in little Easter eggs. So Polly's just poking her bill around the corner. So the line that's just got the hair that's stuck up on the right of the image. So that's they're little Easter eggs to keep me interested, if you like. So process. So that's all I draw. That's all I use: a pencil and rubber.
I was going to ask you,
Yep.
what are the tools of your trade?
Yeah. That's it. So technical. I use a technical pencil because I don't have the time to sharpen it. So it's a 4B. I use a 4B lead. And this is kind of a typical mood board. It's not terribly extensive, but I'm just showing you this is an example of how I'd work. So this is what might be presented to me.
So the costume designer might present you with
Yes,
that.
exactly.
But
We
you
have research.
might also contribute.
Yeah. So invariably, this is based on the Blackfoot Indians, and you have a look at lots of aspects of that culture and what they wear and how they wear it, and you try and imbue it into a drawing. But you might say to the researcher, "Oh, can you find me 5 more examples of that?"
Yeah.
So you can see. So there's starting with a photograph. The first image is just that's how I start. So you've got central axis. I've got proportion. I don't need anything more than that. I'll photocopy that maybe 10 times. And then the middle one, that's drawn on top of a photocopy. So I can do endless versions if I please, to try and get to a profile and a look that I think is interesting, and then I do a final version following conversations with my designer of the final look. So what's the language here is what it tells us. So I thought it'd be interesting if you had a white woman coming into a culture as a medicine woman, for instance. Hence the wing of the bird is historically within the culture is associated with being a medicine, dispersing medicine, as it were, and knowledge, and various other aspects within. The checkered slipper, for instance, is a very given aspect of the Blackfoot Indians. So you start to use those little bits of detail, and I think by drawing, you probably add a little bit more character. I thought it would be fascinating as being white to give her a cigarette. I know it's probably not terribly PC these days, but again, you want to ask the question of the character. And then we get on to Wicked. Wicked for me was in the kind of all-time greats of the films that I've worked on. I have, some of them have been truly amazing, but the first Pirates of the Caribbean would always remain one of those exceptional films, simply because it hadn't been done before. You know, Wicked is kind of up there, the same, really. So I was, because of my background in terms of drawing and because of the history of the Frank F. Baum story, you know, the Wizard of Oz books, as it were, the designer, Paul Taswell, who also draws, was presented my work and said, I mean, the project started in the States, and then when he heard it was coming to the UK, he approached me and said, I'd love you to be involved with this project. And that's for me, I wasn't terribly, I was familiar with Wizard of Oz and a little bit about Wicked, but I didn't realise the fan base was so, massive. So I kind of just started. I didn't really do too much on Elphaba because Elphaba was done by a few guys in the States, and it was important for Paul as a person of colour to use, he used a very specific studio who were kind of a black studio, black artists, because he felt it was really important to get across the feeling of being a person of colour in terms of the culture and and what that meant for the character. So I came to Elphaba a little bit later, off the back of all that stuff that had been done before. So, and really it was just kind of asking the questions of, in my instance, obviously this is a kind of a selling image, a reasonably general image, what is her makeup? Is she going to have lipstick? I mean, just very fundamental things in a way. This is much later on when this is from part 2. So I have to say that when I first started in pre-production, it was only going to be one film. And then I think we got about 2 or 3 months in, and then they realised it was too big a story to tell. So then it was like, okay, we're going to make this 2 features. But they were filmed literally, sequentially, back to just back to back. So this is from the second film, and all we had here was just a general kind of look. I mean, these are related in a way. This is very early, the same sort of phase of the film, and this is when we kind of finalised on a little bit more of her look in terms of the texture and how ragged it was going to be in the volumes. And of course, her hat changes because as she becomes the character, she becomes much bigger within the storyline. So her hat gets larger, the brim gets larger. Again, I'm just doing simple, just trying to get to the core of what those, the garment is or the look. And then these are very much, these are kind of what I call much more finished costume illustrations as opposed to concepts. So there's a very differing, I operate in 2 different worlds in a way. So one is concepts, which are to do with ideas. The second part is costume illustration, which is we have stuff made, we don't have access to the actors, but can you dress the actors? So we had all the makers have made all the uniforms, for instance, and there's some of these things are all mannequins. But can we now, can we put the actor in? So, that's also part of my remit. I mean, it's a kind of the kind of it's the epitome of the kind of the best part of the job, if you like. It's not. I enjoy it, but it's probably a lot more time consuming. It depends whether the job can afford it or. And then this is my first. I think this is the only concept I did, which then went on to be quite a big thing, I guess. But it was just trying to again get to the core, referencing the Glinda the Good in Wicked of Oz. So using that pink and that and that's very much Paul's take. So he just said to me, look, this is where I'm coming from, this is what I kind of want to imbue, and then the rest was kind of left up to me to try and conjure. And at this point in time, we're not sure if in the script of all those sort of after effects, whether we're going to have butterflies or birds, all those things flying about, and I had no idea of that. So I'm just trying to sell a little bit of a narrative, really, that's all. Yeah, and then we get into, you can see these are just repeated, the same pose, just flipped, but different hairstyles. And it's just various different looks, through her journey. I mean, obviously she's a bit of a fashionista within the film. And we made obviously the school uniform was a given. I think the two on the outside, we actually fabricated, but she never wears them in the film. But because she has this extensive wardrobe, they were made and just put, as a set prop. So you do see them. And yeah, these three all appear. So again, I'm working with, I have samples of, it's like the one, this is from the Old Dust Ball. I have samples of that fabric that I can reference. So just to try and get, those hues and so on. But, in terms of the feel, Paul has seen a rose in the centre of London as he is coming to work one morning through one of the gardens, public gardens. Just picked the head off and came and said, "This, I want to try and capture these colours." So there's the concept and then the finished thing. So you can see, we're in the same sort of area. These are all from the second film, I think, these ones. This is quite a famous one because I think it was, everybody in the department was sold on this middle image. The colours were inverted, it became pink with a green underneath. And there was a film poster made of it, and all the fans online went mad for it. Then, of course, it didn't appear in the film, so it became quite a controversy. And this is quite amusing because when I first started, our leading man hadn't been cast. So we had somebody else. So I can't tell you who that person was, hence, but I did. I didn't have time to change and put our new cast member in. So just for Fierro, it just had to remain, and he will be forever unknown. So. But again, you can see, going back to that vernacular I was talking about earlier, about the language of costume. Such a strong, Wicked has such a strong look, because we're world building, and that for me is just such an exciting aspect, over and above, being presented with, contemporary dress, for instance, or just taking something from, pulling something from, a costume house. So yeah, the world of creation is very exciting in terms of a concept.
So you don't get involved in the costume houses that much, really, because of that. What you just mentioned?
In Wicked, because it's world
built.
Yeah, exactly. So period stuff. I mean, we obviously reference 30 styles, but we pulled some stuff, when they go to Emerald City from costume houses. But nearly everything else is manufactured within the department or by the department. Yeah.
And what happens to the costumes after?
A lot of it depends really. They just go to storage.
Could they be reused, or is it?
Yeah, a lot of it does. So invariably, costume houses will buy a lot of that stuff, and have it within their stock. But Wicked, for the best part, a lot of that Wicked stuff, is now doing the rounds of the world, because
exhibitions.
Exactly. Yeah.
And do your drawings go accompanying such exhibitions?
So there's an exhibition at the moment in Chicago. It's to do with the world of Port Taswell. So a lot of my drawings are there. Yeah. So, my job is not. I didn't really do any background characters for Wicked. I only did I was given a very distinct, set of characters to concentrate on.
Perhaps we should open up
Yeah,
to the
absolutely,
students can ask you questions.
absolutely.
Yeah,
So
great.
I think we're at the
Now
end.
there were a couple of questions that we missed. who
Sit down there.
who asked the question previously? Put your hand up. Do you know?
Wait,
Yeah, you asked it. We filmed one of them, but you had a question before that. Do you remember what it was?
I think it was part and parcel of the same.
Okay,
Yes, I think.
don't worry too much. Has anyone got any questions for Darrell that they'd like to ask him? Okay, I'll come to you first.
thank you very much. If you were to start your career from scratch, if one of us is to get a concept or design, how would you recommend building up your skill set? Like, how would you recommend getting into it? Because you need a lot of communication skills, obviously. You need a lot of drawing skills, obviously. But how would you develop those?
I think there are probably there are two aspects to it. Obviously, it's to do with the communication, but you can't have the conversation if you don't have the skill. So I would say, if you want to be involved in this world, then I would absolutely do your research and look at costume illustrators and costume concept artists to see where you fall within that world. And also, I think you do have to follow a passion. It's not something you can just step into willy-nilly, because I've noticed over the years people come and go, and I think you have to be aware of your longevity and persistence. And when I said being bloody-minded earlier, I think that's one. Being a bit stubborn about what you do is quite critical. So very much pursue, and focus on really what it is that you can bring. Whether it's through I think obviously you have to have a skill set. I mean, there are quite a wide range of illustrators, practicing in my area. Not all of them work hyper realistic. Some of them are very stylistic. So that's an aspect. But also, you have to remember that you have other areas of film, animation. There's a lot of costume design and animation. And that has become. You look at K-pop. All those characters are all designed. There's all costume design. A lot more of those animation studios are employing costume designers. So that's also another way of looking at it. And also the gaming world. So it's not just film. In terms of the percentages, film occupies this amount. I mean, games is massive, as is animation, much bigger. So I would certainly say the world of film is very competitive. In order to get a foot in the door, look at those other areas first, but certainly analyse what it is that's required.
Another question there? All right. Thank you.
I was going to ask, how do you source your research and inspiration for your concept, and how does that differ from historical designs versus fantasy?
That kind of comes. Well, it's a group thing because we have researchers. So it's analysed first in terms of what the designer is looking for. So that's not once I have a remit, then I can work within what it is required. So as I said earlier, you can have a given garment that dates from 1750 to 1780, but I might say, okay, within that realm of that garment, what were the cuts? What were the differentiations within that period of time? So then a researcher will go away, look that up, and then present to me. Then I might decide that this suits this character better than this line. So, and I guess it's a case of that just comes with experience over time, and just having those the conversation with your designer in terms of what they're looking for.
Another question here?
How much of a role do you play in prop and set design, or is it specifically just costume?
No, I'm solely just costume. I mean, I cross into those other areas, but only to ask the question in case we have an intermediary play. So you know, if there's a prop that we need to build a, I don't know, you know, a Bordric for, I would go and have that conversation with, you know, with set design or production design, just to see, you know, how that relates to us as costume.
Any other questions? Okay.
Can I ask, do you have a favourite medium to work in?
Well, I mean, watercolour is my favourite medium, really, simply because I like it for its tradition to begin with, and I like the fact that you can, you know, the colour, if you're a very good exponent of it, the colour really sings on the paper. You know, that's the big thing. But because I trained in oils, I must say that, you know, that informs the way I use watercolour, because I tend to use watercolour as a glaze. I tend not to. You know, it's a very easy medium to get very muddy, so you have to be aware of how all those colours work together. So, yeah, there's a purity to it that's appealing.
Anybody else? Yeah? I'd rather have student questions than hear us whittering on. There you go.
So what was your worst kind of working relationship or experience on film? I asked them not for the drama, but more for the what makes a good working relationship and how do you navigate so many people?
That's a good question. I mean, some designers you just know you're not going to get on with. It's just like, you know, meeting somebody at a party. You think, actually, you know, they're not for me. You know, there's a certain amount of reputation. You know, a certain amount of reputation because of what I've worked on. So you get, you know, I don't get interviews. So people phone you and ask you if you're available. And what I tend to do is I tend to do a little bit of research on what those designers have done in the past and whether I think, I'm not saying this from any ego point of view, but I'm thinking, do they know what they're using me for? That's the question I ask myself, because when you look historically at the films they've worked on, you know, do they, you know, I have to say, do they need me? Why would they need somebody like me? And then when they can be quite persistent. I mean, I've worked on a few jobs that have been problematical with designers, and not necessarily from my perspective, but I think because of the level of, let me put it this way, a lot of designers are scared by the fact that you're presenting stuff in such a way. You know, they don't feel they have any latitude because I draw exactly what they're telling me to do, and so therefore they get a little bit frightened because they don't want to be tied down so precisely. So when somebody comes to me and then you start proposing ideas, some of them really mind those ideas, some of them are really frightened by them. But it's to do with a lot of it's to do with the way they work, then kind of, and the way they present costume design in a way. You tend to find, so when you work for, and this is really telling, so the difference between working for Oscar-winning designers and, I mean, I'm not saying they're divisional at all, but you tend to find, because they're very relaxed in their approach to costume and they know what they're about, they just give you a brief and then just let you go and have a play. You can get, I mean, I'll go and hang myself, literally. You know, you produce so much stuff, but then that's, you know, the joy on my part, because you'll just come up with so many ideas, and they just look at it, and then of course they start to edit those ideas because they're getting so much more than they ever could anticipate. So that's why they're in the position they're in, because they can afford to employ somebody like me to say, okay, just give us what you've got. Whereas others are very, very, very dictatorial and just this is what I want, you know, and that's fine. But they don't let you give anything more because you know it's just getting to the point, and that's fine. But it's not terribly engaging on my part. You know, I have to accept I'm a jobbing illustrator ultimately, and that is part of my job. But you just you veer towards those designers that you enjoy and they enjoy what you bring in, in the relationship you have. So I very much try and cultivate those a lot more. And and other designers, like I say, with Sinead on the Beatles, she very much just embraced the fact that I could bring something to the party that I hadn't even thought about. So, and that's all just because you're all artisans together.
Yeah.
I was just going to ask whether it ever feels frustrating that this is clearly a role that a lot of people don't know about, and I think probably for a lot of people in this room it's not something they've heard of before, especially in the sense that it seems like you're doing something so huge and so integral to the making of those costumes that it feels under-recognised in a sense.
Sorry, the last bit?
That it feels under-recognised in a sense that we wouldn't know about it before.
Yeah, I mean there is absolutely. But it's I only ever work. I think the title of the talk was under the radar. It's just something you have to accept. I sign an NDA. Every project I sign an NDA. I'm not supposed to talk about until it's released. I'm not really supposed to talk about it. But that's just the nature of the business. I mean, you do get recognition, because they do art of books, so you get the recognition in that respect. But it's quite tricky. I mean, I've always really wanted to promote the fact that you can have a career in it, a career as a traditional artist still, which I think you can if you're that way imbued and you have the facility. But it's really difficult with the studio. So I think it was 2 years ago I was due to have a sort of major retrospective in the States of my career to date. We'd spent 3 years putting together an exhibition of 65 works across all genres, and 3 weeks from actually putting the show up, Disney said, no, we're not going to allow you to do it. Because they own the NDA, because they own the rights. It's like, until that point, they'd all been in approval, but suddenly Disney just pulled the plug and said, actually, we think we might do something like that ourselves. And you can't argue. I don't have the funds to argue, to say legally, So that's something you just have to take you have to take the hit.
So all the images you were going to put in were from Disney films?
Not all of them, no. So over that period of time, for 3 years, I'd approached all the studios, got all the rights to use those images, originals for the show, and then so it's huge that is huge organisational, and shipping costs. I mean, all manner of stuff. Trying to, there's a lot of energy, and then I just vowed, do you know what? I can't be, because lots of people say, oh, you should produce an art of book. It's too fraught with too many issues. I mean, Wicked is a typical case in terms of, there has never been an art of book. And lots of people say, why? Because it's such a major film, a project.
So the Disney concern is that people would take photographs of your
I don't know.
images and then reproduce them
I honestly don't know.
digitally.
I honestly don't know. I think they're so controlling of,
I've heard of that.
But Wicked is a typical case in point. Although it's Universal and Universal have the rights, the original writer of Wicked, I can't remember his name, is it Maguire? I can't remember. He owns the rights. So even though the film has been made, Universal can't use the images to promote sort of secondary books, for instance. So a Wicked art of book will presumably never be. Because the author still owns the rights to his story. It's fraught with legalities.
Anyone else? Okay. Can you You're allowed. Okay. Sean, just can you?
Carry on.
Yes, we do.
So this is your passion and your job, but do you do any art outside of this, just for yourself for fun or?
I'll show you. So I have an exhibition coming up, which is, so this is just very brief, this is just part of my studio, so you can just see the sort of paraphernalia you have around you.
Where is the exhibition?
The exhibition will be in Gloucestershire. There's a place called the Nature and Art Museum. So part of the other side of, in brief, during COVID, when the world was still, I was walking my dog one day, our dog, and there's a short stretch of road in the village, and I found a dead song thrush, still warm. So I kind of picked it up and I thought, oh God, what do you do? And I was just struck by the beauty. Now, I kind of got into painting in the very first instance as a kid because I was influenced by one particular book, which is by an artist called Ray Harris Ching, who painted birds. So I'd always had this fascination with birds anyway. So I was presented with this dead song thrush, and I thought, actually, I have nothing to do. Maybe I'll just take it home and paint it. So that's what I did, not knowing where it would lead. I had no idea. I did it, and then I thought, because it was a little bit of painting for myself, and then I put it in for some competitions, and then it started getting, the nature of the paintings, shall we say, because it wasn't the only bird I painted, started to get, it started to kind of garner some sort of gravitas, and started winning awards. So this is the exhibition. It's coming up in May. So over the period from COVID till now, for instance, whenever I have an opportunity outside of film, I will then return to my own painting. But it's very much been about our effect on natural history, and particularly birds. So everything I've done is of a dead animal or dead bird that's been struck by a vehicle, or been caught in a net, or been flown into a window, and it's to do with that interjunction of the human and the natural world.
So if you send us a copy, I'll share it with the students.
Yeah.
Cool. Wow.
And then there's that's the song thrush at that first song thrush. So and then it's just there's a lot. There's a lot of
Great.
But gives you an idea.
Okay, so thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Now we haven't talked about AI, which I'm quite thankful for, and we're not going to go into it. But I just wanted to say that the thing that strikes me is human imagination. I think what you see here is the irreplaceability of that. And I think AI can do a lot. And we know Carolina, who runs a studio for concept artists, and there are ways in which people are using it, training it on their own work, and then they might say, okay, produce me 20 versions of this idea, and then they might refine that. But that's all trained on their own material. So I think there are ways that people are using it ethically. But the thing, like I say, the thing that strikes me is that the irreplaceability of the human imagination. So
I think so. For obviously, I'm very much removed from it. I can see its facility and its use, and I know a lot of concept artists who are using it, but using the data of their own work. But the last 4 films I've worked on, we've had AI artists, which has been fascinating to observe, because I come from such a different perspective in terms of what I bring to a project. So the last job, I've just finished on a job in Budapest. I've been there for 6 months, and I've been with 4 AI artists, and essentially when I arrived there, the designer didn't. They approached me to be on the project, but they didn't really know what they were going to use me for. So I kind of had to make up my own job, because of course the AI guys were facilitating everything they required. So it's kind of, it's like, you know, partially you're in quicksand thinking, where do I sit in all this? And then I thought, well, don't be stupid, I just read the script and thought, okay, I'll start concentrating on the characters, you know, all the given cast. Characters as opposed to cast, we didn't have a cast at the time. And so I start working through how I felt, it's a historical piece, asking the questions of, is this old world or new world? So we're talking about the Byzantine world. This is what the project was. It's about the withdrawal of the Roman Empire from Asia. And so my question was, you know, there obviously is like it's like Gladiator. It's that scale of film. So my question was, if we have Romans, are they old school or new school? If they're old school, how are they going to be dressed? Are they going to be dressed in this? Are they going to have leather? Are they going to have chainmail? Are they going to have, you know? So it was really asking the question of production and the designer in terms of what is the look, whereas opposed to the AI guys were just churning out endless images constantly. I'm like 100 images a day. You know.
You still need to ask the right questions,
exactly.
And if you don't have the questions which come from experience, then it's just going to churn out slop.
So what happens is, So what happens is that, you know, I'm starting to do really informed drawings going forward. I think 6 weeks in, we have a meeting with the producer's studio and the director. So if you can imagine, I occupy a space. I've got a small office which probably occupies this space here. I've got all my drawings, but this side is open and there's a presentation area here. So all the AI drawings are up on the walls here. The entrance to the room, so I'm screened here, so they come in and see all the AI images, and they all, as a group, there's about 12 of them, walk over, so they've got their back to me, I'm sat there, just working, and they look at all the AI images, and you can just see that they're it's not that they're deflated, but you get a sense there's so much they can't take it in. And then they turn around and see my drawings, and suddenly, you know, they just all make their way over and stand around my desk and just chat to me about, oh, you know, why have you done this and what's this? And because it's informed. And I think that's the difference. And because you're selling, you know, the character, it just makes it much more interesting from their perspective, because they can see exactly potentially what they're going to get. You know, the whole AI thing for me is, it is fascinating, but it's like designing. It's like having a catalogue.
What do AI drawings even look like?
I mean, they're very realistic, but what they don't do is they don't sell character.
No, I mean one example of where it's definitely going to be used is in drama reconstruction. I've spoken to 2 production companies in the last 3 weeks who, if you're doing a documentary and you need to do drama reconstruction, that is very, very expensive. And also because it has to be historically accurate, you know, 50 years of historical period can completely change the look of it. So where they're using it is training it on their existing drama reconstruction, but then being able to say, tweak it, the spears need to be an extra foot longer, and, you know, so, and that's a cost thing, right? But you know, when you're talking about ideas, ultimately AI needs the ideas from somewhere. And it's either going to do that by scraping copyright or using material or having somebody who's really well informed feeding that information in. So, I'm going to have to dash off. Do you want to stay a bit longer or?
Darrell, is there anything else you wanted to say? You don't think we've covered?
I mean, the students are welcome to come and talk to you afterwards.
Absolutely. If you want to come and ask questions, please do.
But I'm just conscious that we've got to get a load of gear out of here if somebody else is coming in. I think that was a really amazing talk. And thank you, Sarah, for your questions and your time.
It was such a rich presentation. I got mine in and you did sort of answer lots of them.
Okay. Yeah, brilliant. So well done and thank you so much. Brilliant.